Hello students, we are going to learn Introduction to Logic in this course. The course has a code PCL2042. So what we are going to learn in this course? We are going to learn something very basic about what is logic, what are the arguments. Now the question is why we should study all these things. So we expect that after undergoing this course, a student will be able to understand, identify the nature and structure of the arguments, reasonings, and also the student will be able to see whether the argument is good or bad. So in order to do that, we are going to introduce certain methods and principles so that they can be used and the credibility or soundness of the argument can be decided. Similarly, we are using language in our day-to-day parlance, in ordinary situations, in informal situations, as well as in formal situations. But then what happens? Sometimes we are a little careless, or maybe most of the times some people are careless about using their language. So when we understand the nature of language and where it can mislead us, we can be a careful speaker, we can be a careful writer. Similarly, in this course we will also learn the limitations associated with our ordinary general claims. So these are the expectations which we have, and if you take up this course seriously, then you will be guided on all these matters. So consider the topics which will be covered under this course are something like that. We will first learn the definition of argument and how many kinds of argument generally we come across, we use in our normal discourse. And we will also see under what conditions a statement becomes true and argument becomes valid. Then we will move on to discuss the simple and compound statements and what is the relationship between them which qualifies to be called an argument. Then we will learn certain decision procedures, how we can decide the truth value of any statement, and for that we have certain techniques. One of the techniques is called truth table, which we are going to learn in this introductory course. Then we will also have proof construction. So how the argument is designed and how we arrive at step by step to its conclusion. Then after we will move on to categorical propositions, the propositions which are of certain kind. So we will learn their definition and what is the relationship between different kinds of categorical propositions. Then we will see that what kind of arguments we develop when we use categorical propositions. So the arguments of such kind where we have the employment of categorical propositions is called categorical syllogism. So we will learn how to identify that it is a particular kind of syllogism and how it can be tested to be valid or invalid. Then we will see that the arguments which can be identified on the basis of their form, they are rather easy to understand and also see the defects in them. But then we will see that the arguments which are not of that formal kind, if they become defective, so how do we identify their defect, the problems inherent in them? So under the title called classification of fallacies, we will understand different problems associated with the arguments which are of informal kind. Then we will move on to understand the very principle behind our understanding of cause and effect relationship, how we arrive at the understanding of cause and effect relationship. Then from here on we will move on to understand the inside of the proposition, inside of our statements, and the interrelationship between their internal elements enable us to decide whether the argument is valid or invalid, and this is called basically predicate logic or quantificational logic. So we will learn how these arguments are symbolized and how they can be tested to be valid or invalid, and if they are valid, how we can construct their proof of validity, and if they are invalid, how we can demonstrate their invalidity. So these are some resources which we are going to use in our class. So these books are available online also, so it is not difficult, you can easily get it. So try to get the first two sources, Introduction to Logic by Irving M. Copy and Symbolic Logic, again by the same author. There is another interesting book, that is the third one. It's a voluminous, in fact, it's a big one, more than 600 pages. So it is a concise introduction to logic by P.J. Hurley. So if you can manage looking at least some of the sections, because we are not going to take up each and every part of these books, so we will be choosing from here and there, and in our choice we will begin with the book Symbolic Logic for our immediate discussion. So these are the source materials which will be used for our discussion, and we will have problems taken up for our clarification, for our solution, and largely we will draw our problems from these books. So that is also an aspect of our exercise, so you can just get it from the websites so that you have the book with you. And certainly we are going to make certain more videos, and these videos will be uploaded time and again on the website, different sources. In fact, what we have planned, that we will upload these videos on YouTube, and we will send the link of that through our Moodle platform. So you'll come to know. Another fact is that there are 3 faculty members who are teaching this course. All are developing their videos separately. So you will come to know different ways of telling the same thing by different faculty members. So this way you will have a taste of different kinds with respect to the same content. If you like, you can go through other contents also, but certainly you have to take up one content or one instructor thoroughly, and now and then you can hit upon the material supplied by other instructors of the same course. And certainly we are going to have a common paper, whether it is our mid-semester examination or major examination. Regarding quizzes and assignments, sometimes we conduct it jointly, so there will be common quizzes and assignments, and sometimes we conduct it separately for each batch. So that is also a mode of a continuous evaluation of your performance. But the ultimate objective of the course is not to have your evaluation or judge your intellectual ability. Instead, the course intends to facilitate learning of the arguments. And remember, in our day-to-day life, we use arguments, we try to understand the arguments given by others, and therefore it is our requirement, one of the intellectual requirements, to know the nitty-gritties associated with the arguments. And once we are familiar with that, there are two advantages, immediate advantages. One is that when we offer our argument, we are careful, we will not formulate bad kind of arguments. And when we are to accept or examine arguments given by others, and we are familiar with the nature of arguments, so we can easily see whether the arguments offered are good or bad, or what are the difficulties with those arguments. So it is our requirement and day-to-day requirement. Now let us get into the topic itself, introduction to logic. Generally, logic is defined as a systematic study of reasoning. Reasoning is also understood as argument. We will see the definition very soon, what is argument, but let us try to make sense of the title itself first. So, focus on the title where you have 3 letters, introduction to logic. So in this course we are going to have only basic discussions regarding the concepts of logic. So we are not going to discuss very advanced level of logic. It is introductory course, so certainly the discussion will be confined to something very basic to what we call logic. And logic, as I said, is the study of reasoning, a systematic study of reasonings. So what we will do in this introductory course, we will try to understand certain basic concepts, certain methods, and certain principles, so that we can see through a logical reasoning, logical thinking. And as I mentioned earlier also, it is necessary so that we can formulate good argument, we can appreciate good arguments, and also we can evaluate the arguments given by others or put forth by ourselves. So that is the explanation regarding the very title. Now let us move on to the next point. Raise this question: what is logic? You can pause this video, try to figure out your own responses of this question before looking into the further content. So certainly you will hit upon certain common understanding of logic. Let us try to understand what logic is here in our context. Now, generally we define that it is a study of peculiar kind. Logic is the study of the methods and principles to discern or differentiate good arguments from bad arguments. And we certainly feel the necessity of formulating and understanding of arguments. So a better understanding of argument will make us a better writer, better orator, a better intellectual. Now, since logic is the study of reasoning, study of arguments, so next question is, what is argument? Now, again, you need to pause this video for a moment and try to come up with your own answer to this question. What is argument? Normally we use in our day-to-day conversation that someone is arguing, or this is not a good argument, this is not a good logic. So in day-to-day conversation, in day-to-day parlance, we use this expression argument. So if you try to understand what you refer to when you say that this is a good argument or bad argument, you will see certain very common and interesting responses by yourself. Now let us see how the logicians understand argument, how they define it. So first thing is that an argument is a group of two or more statements. This is the first feature of its definition. It's a group of statements, and in a group, you know that there is no group which has just one member, right? So we call something group only when there are more than one. So an argument is a group of statements, and there we find at least two or more than two. Now, there are many group of statements. Not all group of statements can be called argument. So this second feature of the argument differentiates an argument, a group of statements called argument, from the group of statements which cannot be called argument. So what is that second feature? The argument is a group of statement, and there is an interrelationship between the members of this group. What is that relationship? These statements which form an argument are so related that one statement is claimed to follow from the other statements. That means in the group called argument, we find one statement which is following the other statements. That means that particular statement is in need of the support of other statements, and it depends on the quality of support it garners from those statements, and it is that which determines the nature of the argument. Now take an example. Consider all speck-bearing animals are humans. Mohan is a speck-bearing animal. Therefore, Mohan is a human. Now consider this. In all these three statements, the last statement is our claim. We are claiming that Mohan is a human. Now the reason for this claim we have given in the preceding two statements. That is, all specks-bearing animals are humans, and Mohan is a specks-bearing animal. Therefore, Mohan is a human. So our claim that Mohan is a human is seeking support from the preceding statements. We are saying this, we are asserting this on the basis of the preceding two statements. Now, after observing this argument, you can easily see that the basic constituent of an argument is these statements. Now, in one sense, these statements are also called proposition, but actually there is a conceptual difference between proposition and statement. What we call proposition is meaning of a statement. A statement means something, and what does it mean? That is called proposition. And of course, a statement is a linguistic organization belonging to a particular language. Now let us instantiate. As I said, statement and propositions are different, but I will very soon say that don't take their technical difference into account when you go through this course. Now, in order to make further clarification of the difference between statement and proposition, we can understand what is a sentence. So if you look at English grammar, there you find that sentence is defined as a meaningful combination of words. And you know that there are many kinds of sentences. Some are imperative, suggesting something to do or not to do. There are certain exclamatory sentences expressing certain emotions, certain feelings. There are certain sentences called interrogative sentences. They are meant to raise certain questions, ask questions, inquire about something. Then we have declarative sentences which make certain claims regarding the facts, regarding the reality. Now, among all these sentences, only declarative kind of sentences are called statements, which means the sentences which assert, which say, which claim something about the reality, they are called statements. They are stating something about the reality. So, only a declarative sentence is called statement. And since the statements say something about the reality, and whatever they say about the reality is found in the reality, then we say that this statement is true. And if they say something about the reality which is not found in the reality, then the statement is false. Consider, for example, we say Mohan is honest. Assume Mohan being a person whom you know, and if you find that that person is really honest, then the assertion related to that person, Mohan is honest, is true. And suppose you say Mohan is honest, but in actual life Mohan is not honest. So what happens? Your assertion, your claim, your saying that Mohan is honest becomes false because the reality is otherwise. So a statement claims, says something about the reality, and if the reality is the way it is claimed in the statement, then the statement is true, otherwise it is false. Now come to the concept proposition. As I said, proposition is the meaning or the content of the statement. What is contained in a statement, that is called proposition. Consider, for example, Mohan is honest. It is a statement of English language, and in Hindi we say Mohan ईमानदार. Now Mohan is honest is one statement, Mohan ईमानदार है is another. But both these statements contain the same proposition. They mean one and the same thing. So what is shared by these two statements is the meaning. And we say in logic that these two statements contain the same proposition. We can add further examples of different languages. So the same thing can be said in different languages And the other way around is also true. We can use different statements to say the same thing, or we can say different things by using the same statement at different times, or maybe a different context. So the difference between statement and proposition is precisely a technical difference, a conceptual difference. But when we treat these two expressions in logic, largely we take them in one sense. So don't get confused when you find sometimes we use expression statement, sometimes we use proposition. You take both of them in the same sense. Now, since statement or proposition is the basic constituent of an argument, now let us try to understand in little logical language what an argument is. So you have just learned that argument is a group of statements, and that group of statement has got a unique feature that one of the statements participating in the argument is claimed to be supported by the other statements. So the statements which are supporting that one statement are called premises in technical language of logic. The supporting statements are called premises in the argument, premises of the argument. And the statement which is supported by those statements is called conclusion, conclusion of an argument. And there is a unique relationship between the premises and the conclusion of an argument. This relationship is given this technical name implication. So we, with all these logical terms, we can redefine argument. Argument is a combination of premises and conclusion, and there is an implication relationship between the premises and conclusion. And therefore, when we say that a group of statement is an argument, what we mean to say that certain statements in the argument imply their conclusion, or the conclusion follows from the premises. The supported statement follows from the supporting statements. So this is the structure of an argument. An argument has got this structure of premise and conclusion. Now there are certain identifying markers. How we identify that this particular group of statement is an argument. So first we try to figure out which statement is claimed to be supported, which statement is the conclusion in the whole structure. And for that, these are the markers. The statement which is following from these expressions like therefore, accordingly, entails, that, thus, hence, to conclude, consequently, we may infer that, it follows that, so, as a result. These are some expressions which point out that this particular statement in the group is the conclusion. And sometimes it happens that we don't see these expressions in the group of statements. So shall we say that this group of statement is not an argument at all? No. We can go for further exploration that without conclusion marker, how can a group of statement be called an argument? So, in the case where there is no conclusion marker, we go for premise markers. So, there are certain examples of premise markers. So, wherever you find the occurrence of these expressions, you can take that the statements containing these expressions cannot be your conclusion. So consider, for example, a statement following since cannot be your conclusion. Because is the reason, so that cannot be your conclusion. A statement following for or given that or as or owing to or as much as, for the reason that, in that, maybe inferred from or seeing that, etc. So these are certain expressions which are basically premise markers. So if we don't find conclusion marker, we can go by the premise markers and try to see that this is an argument or not. So we figure out the structure of an argument by taking cue from these expressions. Now, a passage contains argument if it purports to prove something. That is, a claim, which can be called inferential claim, could be explicit or implicit. To this effect, is necessary that the group of a statement is meant to prove something. That means, when we claim that a particular statement is supported by the other statement, then we can say that this group is an argument. But remember, these are only heuristics. These are only pragmatic suggestions. These expressions, which we call conclusion markers and premise markers, are also found in different groups of statements called, let us say, opinion or advice or warning, or just for reporting purpose, we use these expressions. And therefore, we need to be careful, cautious enough so that we don't confuse that the group of a statement is argument or not. Now, a very common tendency among us is to confuse argument with interpretation or explanation. And therefore, it is necessary to understand what is interpretation. So remember, interpretation is not to prove any sentence or prove any topic. But what interpretation does is it expands or elaborates the point in question. Similarly, argument is different from explanation. The job of explanation is to shed light on certain topic, event, or phenomenon. Argument is not supposed to shed light on any topic. Argument is to prove something. So the job of interpretation and explanation is not to prove anything, in fact. Interpretation simply unfolds the topic, and explanation sheds some light on the topic. But in an argument, one statement is claimed that it is acceptable or it is good. And why we accept that? For that, the person offers certain reasons. And these reasons are not in terms of interpretation or explanation. So we need to avoid this very general or problematic tendency of confusing argument with interpretation and explanation.